Belcanto is what I've been hearing as well.
Belcanto is, in general, everything that developed from the Italian language in the full Renaissance. A bunch of people from Florence literally merged around the table and said, hey, we are famous for the way we speak in a very nice way, we should make a musical genre around it. And that's exactly what they did. And they were a bunch of musicians and poets and also instrumentalists. One of them was the father of Galileo, the scientist, who was a lutist, and he was like the Van Halen of his times. He was a great lutist and a theorist of the lute. The Italian singing in heritage ended up in a lot of rock music, because it's not just singing in heritage, but also musical in lutherie and guitar playing. So all of the Frusciante, Morello, and Yommi, and God knows. I mean, a lot of that singing and lyricism ended up elsewhere as well. So,
I mean, forgive me, I know practically nothing about classical music. It is a technique that has been brought into pop quite a bit.
They decided to basically make a musical genre out of the way that the Italians spoke, because Italian existed in literature. It had been existing for 300 years after Dante, more or less, but we had no Italy up until yesterday, up until 150 years ago. So Italy was built around this poetry fact that the Italian language was, and opera was meant as some sort of naphthalene to preserve this language in and spread it around. So Belcanto is everything that was born musically around the effort and the attempt to spread Italian in its musicality and its way with the technology that they had, which was music writing. At the time. This is what Belcanto is, and we still call it that way.
Interesting. It's broader than I realised, actually.
It is the very concept of what we now call Made in Italy altogether, because they saw sort of similarities in between the way we spoke and the way we painted, the type of perspective that we had when we painted, because of the chiaroscuro of the Italian language, open, closed, and so on. And so they thought, let's sort of put all this together. Opera was meant to be some sort of a very primitive form of, not so primitive really, advertising of the core concept of Italy. Consider that Italy was not Italy at the time, and everything it could produce in terms of visual arts, clothes, even, because you had costumes and shoes and so on. So it was a way to advertise the very best of Italian Italy, starting with the most ineffable thing, sort of like the advertisement of what today would be a perfume, which was the sound of the language, which was impossible to transmit. So the writing and the music writing made the transmission of something ineffable, like a perfume, which is the sound of a language at the time, possible at a time when it was impossible, because they were very well aware of the power, of the beauty of the Italianness. It was a thing back in time. It was already a thing. And very up to date, especially if we can pass some truly genuine, and I want to say more genuine, that you can nowadays find in modern conservatories for some reason, because for example, the Italian Belcanto school went very global recently. So and that's the whole reason of my specific work, of my publication of my book. The Italian Belcanto school is no longer based on the roots of the language, and the very vocal technique of Italian Belcanto is no longer attached to those roots, especially after the recording era came up. So people basically, as much as they can read scores, they will just listen and repeat. And so there is a lot of imitation, basically, and less and less real understanding of what the original works were meant to be. And opera scores are like films, like cinematic films of the first manners. But you have to be able to, you have to have the technique to read the signs, to understand the cinema in it, because everything was made through music and through music writing. And now that there's the possibility to reproduce artificially sound and visuals, you no longer need or feel like you no longer need to read those signs in detail and figure out what the composer meant, because sometimes there's music that is actually scenery. It's meant to be a scenery. The music they're playing is meant to set the scenes, to set the tone. And in a recitativo, a character will speak in that way because it's mimicking an Italian dialect or a speech, which gives a totally different nuance to a scene. So what I'm trying to say is now a lot of new singers will just listen and repeat and manage to accomplish what is an outside sort of well-crafted sound with no real content. And in conservatories, paradoxically, that is what is taught. Also, the Belcanto school is being lost pretty much everywhere around the world, and that's where my work comes in, and my book and so on. So your project sounds very juicy to me, especially if in such a glamorous context can provide some actual, in detail, genuine, well-rooted content, if you know what I'm saying.
You just said earlier that Belcanto became global at some point. When and how did that happen? Do you mean
mostly because of recordings, because of the possibility to reproduce something, and because opera became so international? I mean, the original Belcanto school was Italian because it was connected to the word. Nowadays, you have a lot of online, offline, conservatory, official, not so official vocal coaches who will teach the technique based on some sort of imitation of the final result, of the final sound, which is a completely different result than going through the process of understanding the writing and understanding the language. They kind of sound alike to someone who doesn't know the process, but they really do not obtain the same effect even on an audience. And it's really interesting to understand how high-tech the operatic writing technique was at the time. It really was the earliest form of TV, advertisement, stand-up comedy in some cases, but you need to know what's in the score. You need to be able to understand what's in the score. So it takes a lot of layers of culture and of preparation. Nowadays with recordings, you can just listen and repeat. So it sounds alike, you can sell it, you can make a living out of it, but there's really no content. And theaters don't have that much money nowadays, so they will just hire, people that are sort of prepared but cost less, and so the level is getting lower and lower.
Could you run me through maybe what your background is as well and your career so far up to this point?
Well, I have been singing forever, but I have a conservatory degree in singing and one in composition, classical composition. I studied in Bologna. I was born here where I am calling you from, which is southern Italy. I'm near Bari right now. And I was born, raised, and now I'm back to be based here again. But I did my studies in Bologna in singing and in composition, and then also in stage directing. I did, as a stage director, the Young Artists program of the Teatro Comunale di Bologna. And then I moved to the United States, where I started coaching.